Welcome to the deep dive. We're here to tackle those really complex stacks of sources, the ones that, well, make you question things. We break it all down for you, giving you that shortcut to getting informed.
And today, we've got a really ambitious set. We're looking at research that seriously challenges mainstream ancient history, even world religion.
Yeah, and it all centers on the, let's say, unique heritage of Sri Lanka.
Exactly. It's more than just history, though. It's like an investigation into memory, into lost knowledge. We're pulling together myths, linguistics, some pretty esoteric stuff like the Emerald Tablets.
The Thoth connection.
Right, that one. And contrasting all that with, standard colonial history.
So the sources are basically presenting this alternative view, that Sri Lanka isn't just an island.
But maybe the surviving mountain peaks of a huge pre-flood civilization. Globally significant.
It forces us to rethink, well, everything. Legendary figures, timelines, the whole map, potentially.
And the claim is this island holds the key, maybe an unbroken line back to ancient truth.
We need to be critical, of course, but some of the details here are pretty compelling. Okay, let's dive in.
Let's do it.
So first up, a figure everyone thinks they know, Ravana. Often just the villain, right?
The ultimate bad guy in many tellings, yeah.
But these sources argue that view completely misses his ancestral and divine connections. Why is he so often painted that way?
That's really the core question, isn't it? He's portrayed as purely destructive, but this material points to a much deeper, more complex lineage.
Like what specifically?
Well, there's the claim that Shiva, or Eshwar, is actually Ravana's seventh grandfather.
Seventh grandfather, wow. Okay.
Yeah, that connection immediately roots him in, divine power, not just evil. It sets up this inherent duality. He's not just a monster. He's got this direct tie to a major deity.
Which makes you look differently at the symbols associated with him. The sources draw this deliberate parallel between Ravana and Skanda, who's generally revered.
Right. Skanda is worshipped. Ravana is condemned. But they share a key symbol.
The peacock vehicle.
Exactly. Skanda rides the peacock, a symbol of war and wisdom. Ravana. He has the Dandu Manara.
The Dandu Manara. What's that actually mean?
Well, the name itself is revealing. In Sinhala, Manara is peacock. And Dandu suggests something hard, like metal, maybe unyielding.
So a metal peacock.
Pretty much. And this imagery isn't accidental, according to the sources. You've got the graceful peacock for Skanda, and this sort of armored, maybe weaponized metal peacock for Ravana.
Suggesting they're two sides of the same coin.
That's the argument. That they both represent this duality that comes from one source, a kind of balance between different types of power, which later got flattened into just simple good versus evil.
Which brings us to that fascinating bit of art evidence. There's a Ramayana temple in Cambodia.
Yes, and it has this sculpture of Ravana, but crucially, next to him isn't his usual brother, Kumbhakarna.
Who is it then?
It's Ganesh.
Ganesh, the elephant-headed god. Remover of obstacles, wisdom. That's a very different message.
It really is. The sources say the artist is visually showing you that Ravana and Skanda are, quote, both one, not separate. Putting Ganesh there implies Ravana's power isn't just raw chaos, it's guided by, or maybe needs to be tempered by, wisdom.
So ancient perspectives might have seen these figures very differently, not as these black and white opposites.
Exactly. A real contrast to how later dogma often presents them.
Okay, shifting from myth to maybe cultural identity. The sources make a big point about the name of the land itself. Not Lanka, not the colonial Ceylon.
Right. They argued the true original name was Aitana, Chialedeze.
Chialedeze. And the British gave back Ceylon, which then became Lanka. Why is the original name so important?
It comes down to the root word, helayo.
Which means mountain people.
Precisely. And that connects directly back to the idea of the deluge, the Great Flood.
How so?
The belief presented is that modern Sri Lanka isn't just an island, but the highest surviving mountain peaks of a much bigger pre-flood continent. They call it Atalanka.
Like Atlantis, but Lankan.
Sort of, yeah, Atalanka. And the halayo are the descendants of those who survived the catastrophe because they were already living in the highlands. They stayed put on the mountains.
So the Halayo represent this unbroken line, physically preserved by geography. Does that continuity affect the culture, according to these sources?
There's this really interesting analysis suggesting that humans, and they even speculate about future AI, with a long, continuous memory and unbroken ancestry, they tend to be more, well, humble, more moral, perhaps.
Because they haven't had that foundational rupture, that massive loss of knowledge and context.
Exactly. They retain wisdom. So reclaiming that Haleo identity isn't just about a name, it's framed as reclaiming that deep, unbroken memory.
And this ties into a linguistic point too, right? A subtle shift in the name.
A very subtle but potentially profound shift. They contrast the original term Sihala with the modern Singhala.
Okay, what's the difference there?
Well, Sihala, they claim, comes from Siala Hilikala, meaning something like the ones who disclosed everything or revealed all.
So positioning the ancestors as keepers and revealers of ancient knowledge, custodians.
Right. But then you have the modern term Singhala.
And what does that potentially mean, according to this analysis?
It might mean something closer to let go of everything.
Wow. So a single sound change from an H sound to an NG sound could, in theory, shift a whole cultural mindset from revealing truth to letting it go.
That's the provocative idea presented, that this tiny phonetic difference might reflect or even influence a massive change in how a nation sees its heritage and its role.
That's huge, hiding in plain sight almost.
It fundamentally reframes the cultural narrative, and that's why the sources insist reclaiming the original name is so vital, spiritually and historically. It reconnects people to those high-knowledge Haleo who supposedly survived Atalanka.
Which leads us straight into maybe the most controversial claim, Sri Lanka as the actual Garden of Eden, the origin point.
Yeah, this one requires a big mental shift. The argument often uses what they call the flipped map theory.
Flipped map.
The idea that ancient descriptions place Eden on an island to the north. Now, if you take our current world map and orient it differently, maybe flip it, as some historical maps might have been.
Then Sri Lanka could be positioned as that northern island source point.
Potentially, yes. That's the geographical argument. That later changes in map orientation obscured the original location described by ancient travelers.
And the physical landscape itself. Horton Plains comes up specifically.
It does. The sources claim Horton Plains matches ancient descriptions of Eden almost perfectly.
How so?
The key thing is the rivers. Horton Plains is the source of 4 rivers, flowing in directions very similar to those described in Genesis and other old texts or maps.
Okay.
And crucially, 2 of these rivers apparently go underground soon after they start. This detail the sources emphasize matches the more esoteric descriptions of Eden's waterways precisely. They present it as physical evidence right there on the ground.
There's also an esoteric connection, something about the view.
Yes, a visual link. Apparently, the view of Adam's Peak from Horton Plains looks remarkably like the mountain depicted on the lover's card in traditional tarot decks.
The lover's card, what's the symbolism there?
In its older interpretations, that card often symbolizes duality originating from oneness. Finding that specific image mirrored in the landscape, it's presented as a powerful sign that Western esoteric traditions might actually point back to this exact spot as a conceptual origin.
Okay, if this place is seen as Eden, as the cradle, then what happened there during colonial times takes on a much darker meaning. You mentioned Major Thomas William Rogers.
Yes, that story is quite stark. Major Rogers, a British colonial figure, documented killing over 1,400 elephants in Horton Plains alone.
1,400? That's staggering.
It is, and the sources don't see this as just, excessive sport hunting. They argue it was a deliberate act of symbolic destruction.
Why? What was the symbolism?
The elephant, in that ancient context, held immense significance, a symbol of memory, wisdom, stability. Erasing the elephants from Eden was like, well, erasing the living proof, the sacred keepers of that ancient memory.
Tearing the evidence right out of the landscape. Cultural and symbolic vandalism.
That's how it's framed, suppression of proof. And there's this fascinating local legend tied to him.
Oh.
Locals apparently claim that thunder and lightning repeatedly strike Rogers' grave, even today.
Serious?
That's the legend. And it's interpreted not just as weather, but as nature's revenge. It speaks to the perceived sanctity of the place and the long memory of the Haleo tradition, holding on to that story.
Wow. Okay, so let's connect this back to the ancient masters. We talked about Ravana.
Yeah.
He wasn't just a mythological king. The stories involve advanced technology.
Absolutely. And this is where the Thoth-Ravana link gets really interesting.
Go on.
The sources propose that Ravana of Lanka, leader of this advanced solar or Surya lineage, is actually the same historical figure the Egyptians knew as Thoth.
Thoth, the scribe god, keeper of wisdom, often linked to Atlantis.
Exactly. And the author credited with the Emerald Tablets, Ravana led Atalanka. Thoth supposedly left Atlanta after the cataclysm. The parallels are striking.
What specific knowledge connects them beyond the Atlantis-Atalanka idea?
Well, Ravana's flying machines, the Vimanas, are famous. But the sources point to something maybe more specific. Ravana's family deity, Nikumdila.
Oh.
Mikumdila is associated with a powerful blue gemmed staff.
A blue gemmed staff. That sounds familiar.
It resonates strongly with the descriptions of advanced tools, rods, staffs, potentially energy devices found in the Emerald Tablets, and in Egyptian mythology associated with Thoth and the gods. The idea is Ravana Thoth possessed and perhaps hid this kind of pre-flood science.
And we can see traces of this shared ancient world in other ways, too, like deities worshipped across different cultures.
Definitely. Take the goddess Astarte, for example. Widely worshipped in the ancient Near East, her symbol is the 8-pointed star.
Right, so how did that name connect back to Sri Lanka linguistically?
If you break down Astarte using Sinhala roots, Asta means 8,
Okay.
and Taru means star.
Astataru, 8-star.
Directly translates to her symbol. The argument is this isn't a coincidence. It suggests these widely known deities were named and understood using the vocabulary of this proposed original global language rooted in Sinhala. It points to a shared celestial understanding.
This idea of continuity, of preserved knowledge, it extends even to Buddhism, doesn't it? The claim that the purest form is Sri Lankan.
Yes, and that the Sinhala language itself is the key.
Why the language? What's special about Sinhala in this context?
The argument is that Sinhala retains the precise linguistic structure needed to convey the Buddha's Dharma without the distortions that inevitably happen during translation into fundamentally different language systems.
Can you give an example of how that works? How the clarity is kept?
Sure. Take a descriptor often used for the Buddha, loka vidu. Now, in translation, this can become quite philosophical or abstract.
Right, interpreted in various ways.
But in Sinhala, the components are apparently very direct. Loka means world, or maybe universe.
Okay.
And vidu comes from vindapu, which means something like experienced or self-experienced.
So lokavidyu just means one who has self-experienced the universe.
Exactly. The meaning is immediate, concrete. Less room for layers of interpretation or theological debate. The claim is the language itself preserves the core concepts with this kind of directness, making it the truest vehicle for the original Dharma.
Okay, so we've covered a massive sweep here, from like tiny linguistic details like Sihala versus Sinhala.
Yeah, that H versus NG sound.
All the way up to the huge idea of Sri Lanka as the actual origin point, the surviving peak of Atalanka. It demands, really, a complete rethink of so much accepted history and myth.
It really does. And if you connect it all, the bigger picture here is a call for critical thinking, not just about, say, colonial history and how places got renamed.
Which is important.
Hugely important, but also about religious dogma itself. These sources spend a lot of time tracing common religious themes, Aryan sun myths, crucified saviors, virgin births back to recurring solar patterns and astronomical events.
Arguing these were widespread concepts long before established religions codified them.
That's the assertion, that the underlying knowledge, the system of understanding the cosmos, was already there, perhaps globally, and then got fragmented or hidden. The whole pattern suggests knowledge being deliberately obscured.
Like the elephant destruction in Horton Plains. Active erasure.
Exactly. It points to this ongoing struggle maybe over narrative and who controls the understanding of the deep past, a battle to suppress this continuity of ancient truth.
So you've heard how memory, or even just losing a bit of it, like forgetting the original meaning of a name, can potentially reshape a whole nation's identity, from being global knowledge sharers to maybe people encouraged to let go of their past. If these ancient figures, these masters like Ravana or Thoth, really did intentionally hide their most profound knowledge for safety, maybe in places like Sigiriya, as some sources speculate, what does that make you wonder about today? What current global truths, what knowledge might be intentionally obscured right now, just waiting?
Waiting for the right perspective, perhaps, or maybe the right key, linguistic or otherwise, to unlock it all again. Makes you think.